Wyoming Territory, 1877, the wind carried dust and pine needles through the small town of Grady Hollow as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the wooden steeple of St. Jude's Church. Orick Zeller had just tied his sorrel mare to the hitching post when he heard the noise faint, like something broken trying not to cry. He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing toward the back of the small whitewashed church. He stepped carefully around the side, boots crunching on dry gravel. That was when he saw her. She was crumpled near the back steps, half hidden by the church wall and the brush that had grown up around it. Blood darkened the side of her face, and her dress was torn near the shoulder. Her hands were scraped raw, one palm pressed against the ground like she had tried to crawl away. "Ma'am." Orick's voice was low, careful. He knelt a few feet away, hands up where she could see them, her head jerked slightly. "Don't touch me," she said, voice cracked and hoarse. "I'll never hurt you," he said, steady as stone. She didn't move, just kept watching him with wide, wild eyes. Her breathing was fast and shallow. He could see her shaking. "I got clean water in my saddlebag. That's all I'll touch, all right." He waited. When she didn't speak, he stood slowly, backing up toward his horse. He brought back the canteen and a blanket, placing them both gently on the ground a few feet away from her. "My name's Orick Zeller. I ain't a preacher or sheriff. Just a ranch hand passing through." She still did not speak, but her fingers twitched toward the canteen. After a moment, she reached for it with trembling hands and drank. Orick sat cross-legged nearby, keeping his distance. He watched her without staring, just enough to make sure she stayed upright. When she finished, she looked at him again. Her lips were chapped and her cheek had already started to bruise purple. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Henley," she whispered. "Henley Pryce." "Well, Henley Pryce," he said, his voice warm. "You're safe now." Her eyes filled at that silent tears that slipped down her face without sound. She turned her head away, but not before he saw them. They sat like that for a while, her wrapped in the blanket, him watching the sky turn gold and then deep blue. When the sun was nearly gone, he stood. "I got a small cabin about a mile out. If you can ride, I'll walk beside you. If not, I'll figure something else." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes had softened some, but her body was still tight with fear. Finally, she nodded once. He helped her onto the horse, careful not to touch her skin unless she allowed it. She winced a few times, but did not pull away. They moved slow through the trees, Orick's hand lightly on the reins. It was near dark when they reached his place, a single-room cabin nestled at the edge of the woods with a lean-to and a well out back. He helped her down, then stepped away. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep near the fire," he said. She looked around, wary but tired, and finally stepped inside. Orick built the fire up and lit a lantern. He handed her a clean cloth and a tin basin of warm water, then turned his back and busied himself with supper. She didn't speak, but when he glanced over, he saw she had cleaned off the blood and tried to comb through her tangled hair with her fingers. He handed her a plate of beans and cornbread. She took it with shaking hands. When she finished, she looked up at him for the first time. "Why are you helping me?" Orick leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "Because someone should." Henley studied him like she was trying to figure out if he was real. "I do not remember what happened after I ran," she said. "Only that I ended up behind the church." "You do not have to say anything," he said gently. "Not unless you want to." She nodded, then lay down on the bed, still fully dressed. Her eyes stayed open for a long time before they finally closed. Orick watched the fire burn low, jaw tight. Whoever had done that to her, he hoped to God he never crossed paths with them. Because if he did, he was not sure he could keep his hands to himself. The next morning came gray and cool. Henley was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed. Her face looked better, though her eyes still held that guarded look. "I will not stay long," she said. "You do not have to decide that yet." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you for last night," he nodded once. "You are welcome." She helped him fetch water from the well, though she winced every time she bent down. When he offered to take over, she shook her head. "I can work," she said. "I am not broken. I never said you were." They spent the day in quiet, Henley mending one of his shirts, Orick repairing the fence out back. They barely spoke, but it was not uncomfortable, just quiet. That night, she let him hand her a clean nightdress and stepped behind the curtain he had rigged near the bed. When she came out, she looked softer. Tired, but less afraid. She sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of tea. "I was supposed to marry a man back in South Dakota," she said suddenly. "His name was Howard. He was from a good family. He started drinking after his father died, and then," her voice caught. Orick did not move. "He said he would kill me if I ever ran again." Orick's jaw clenched. "I did run. 3 days ago, I made it as far as Grady Hollow and thought maybe the church would keep me safe." "I am glad you made it," he said, voice low. She looked at him. "You should not have to deal with this." "I want to," he said simply. Henley blinked at him, then looked away. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. The next morning, she was waiting on the porch when he came back from the creek. Her hair was braided, her face calm. "I would like to stay a few more days, if that is all right." Orick smiled just a little. "It is all right." For the first time, she smiled too, small but real, and just like that, something between them shifted, quiet and steady as the wind through pine trees. Henley stood over the counter, sleeves rolled up, cutting potatoes with a practiced rhythm. Her movements were precise, though the knife wavered slightly whenever her shoulder tensed. Orick noticed, but said nothing. He was mending the tack by the open door, letting the morning breeze carry in the scent of pine and damp earth. The storm last night had passed quiet but hard, and the ground still held its weight. "You've got a good hand with a blade," he said, not looking up from the cracked stirrup leather. Henley didn't smile, but her voice held the faintest lift. "I did most the cooking for my father's crew before he passed. Men who worked long days worked up longer appetites." Orick set the leather aside. "What did he do?" "Ran cattle in Yankton. Nothing fancy, just kept them fed and moving." She paused, brushing a strand of hair back from her cheek. "He never raised his voice, not once, even when the snow nearly took the herd, even when my brother left and never came back." She looked down at her hands. "I reckon I expect too much from men." He shifted his weight but didn't speak. The way she said it plain, like she was laying a stone down and didn't want help lifting it. "I can stay out of your way if you need to ride into town," she said after a moment. "I'm not headed in today." Henley glanced at him. "I thought you'd be needing supplies." "I've enough for now." "I don't like leaving the land for long." She nodded, then turned back to the potatoes. The silence between them settled easy. Later, she brought the food to the table without ceremony. Fried potatoes, eggs, and half a tin of salted pork. They ate quietly, the clink of forks and the wind tapping the shutters. When they finished, Henley stacked the dishes and carried them to the basin. Orick moved to grab the bucket from outside, but she stopped him with a glance. "I can do it." He let go of the handle. "All right." She returned with the water soon after, and he watched her from the doorway. She poured it with care, then rolled her sleeves higher to scrub the tin plates. Orick leaned against the frame, his arms folded. "You sleep all right?" Henley hesitated, then nodded. "I dreamed of train whistles. There wasn't a train anywhere near Grady Hollow, but I heard one all the same." Orick didn't answer right away. "Sometimes the mind keeps running even after we stop moving." She dried her hands on the apron she'd borrowed, then sat on the bench by the hearth. "I don't know what comes next. You don't have to know yet." "I should. I've wasted enough time not knowing." He stepped inside, picking up the saddle he'd left on the floor. "Knowing's not always the same as choosing." Henley looked at him, her eyes sharper now. "What did you choose?" He hesitated. "To stop drifting. Bought this patch and started building. Figured I'd get more out of the land than out of saloons and lost wages." She tilted her head. "You always live alone, since my brother died." He worked the rail lines. "Powder charge went off too early." Henley looked away. "I'm sorry. I don't tell it for sympathy. Just so you know, I understand what it means to have something torn from you." Henley stood, hands at her sides. "I'm not used to men telling truths without expecting something in return." "I don't expect anything." She looked at him a long time before speaking again. "You've got an axe in the lean-to," he nodded. "I'd like to split some kindling." Orick didn't stop her. He just showed her where the axe was and pointed out the dry stack behind the shed. She worked steady through the afternoon, swinging with care, not speed. Her form was clean, her face calm. He watched from where he was oiling the hinges on the barn door. She never asked for help. She never slowed. When the sun dipped low, she wiped her brow with the back of her wrist and carried the wood to the porch. Her hands were blistered, but she didn't mention it. "That enough for tonight?" she asked. "That's enough for 3. She nodded and sat on the step. "Feels good to do something that stays done." Orick sat beside her, keeping some space between them. "You thinking about heading on?" "Not tonight." Her voice was quiet. "Maybe not tomorrow either." He looked out at the trees. "Every day's yours to keep or give away." Henley leaned back against the post, her eyes on the horizon. "I ain't ready to give anything away just yet." That night, she didn't draw the curtain as she lay down. She folded her arms over her chest and stared at the ceiling, her breathing slow and even. Orick lay near the hearth, the fire casting long shadows over the floor. Neither of them spoke, but something in the stillness between them had changed. Not softened exactly, but steadied, like 2 branches grown toward the same patch of sun. The air was cooler now, autumn pressing in from the edges. Leaves had begun to turn on the sugar maples along the ridge above the cabin, and a fine layer of frost kissed the porch railings each morning. Henley stood wrapped in one of Orick's wool shirts, watching the sun rise pale and low through the trees. "I'd forgotten how quiet land can be," she said. Orick was on the ground sharpening a drawknife, the slow rasp of metal on stone filling the space between them. "Some folks don't take to it." "I think I do," she said, almost to herself. He didn't look up, just nodded once and went back to his work. That day, she asked to help him with the smokehouse. The door had warped during summer storms, and Orick had been meaning to replace the frame. She held the boards while he hammered, her hands steady on the rough pine. Sweat gathered at her hairline, but she didn't pause. "Where'd you learn carpentry?" she asked once the new crossbeam was in place. "Rail gang near Cheyenne taught me enough to keep things from falling down." She studied the fit of the door, then stepped back. "You ever thought about building more here?" He tapped the last nail flush. "You thinking about staying that long?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But it'd be nice to have a place with space for books, and maybe a window higher on the wall near the bed." Orick didn't answer right away. He wiped his brow with his sleeve, then looked at her. "If I built it, would you stay?" Henley's fingers curled around the edge of the doorframe. "I don't want to be kept." "I wouldn't keep you," he said. "I'd just make room." She looked away, eyes on the hills. "That's different." They didn't speak again until supper. She brought in a bowl of creek trout she'd caught herself, cleaned with care and seasoned with wild onion. Orick ate in silence, the fire popping between them. "I found a gold button near the river bend," she said. "From someone's coat, maybe, looked army. Could have washed down from the old trail post." They were stationed up there in the 60s. "Do you ever worry someone'll come looking for me?" she asked. "I've thought about it," he said, "and I've got a .38 and a clean conscience." Henley stared into the fire, lips pressed tight. "I don't want blood on your land. I don't want fear in your bones." She didn't respond, but her shoulders eased. That night, she didn't lie on top of the quilt like she had before. She pulled it up around her and turned toward the window, her face in shadow. Orick banked the fire, then lay down on the floorboards with a blanket around his shoulders. The wind lifted outside, brushing the roof with dry leaves. Inside, the cabin breathed with the quiet of 2 people learning how to be near without asking for more than the other could give. At dawn, Henley was already moving. She tied her hair back with a strip of muslin and had one of the young hens tucked under her arm. "I want to build a coop," she said. "They'll wander too far come spring if I don't." He nodded, moving toward the shed. "There's cedar boards in the loft. We'll need to sand them." They worked side by side through the chill hours, hands raw and red. She didn't flinch when a splinter caught her palm, just dug it out with the tip of her sewing needle and kept on. Orick handed her a square of cloth to wrap it, but she waved it off. "I'll be all right," she said. "I know," he answered. By evening, the coop stood square and strong near the edge of the tree line. She leaned on the fence, watching the hens scratch the dirt. "You ever think about having a family?" she asked. "I used to," Orick said. "Didn't think it'd be this way me out here, near 40, talking to chickens." Henley laughed, the sound faint but real. "I'm not sure I ever thought about it at all. Always figured I'd follow someone else's plans. You don't have to do that anymore." She turned toward him, her face serious. "I know, that's what scares me." That night, she sat beside him by the fire, not across from him. She didn't speak, but her hand rested on the floor between them, close enough to touch. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. But when the fire dimmed low and she stood to go to bed, she paused beside him. I dreamed I was in a house with red curtains. There was a rocking chair, a dog asleep by the stove. Yours? She nodded slowly. I think I built it. Orick looked up at her. You could build it here. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either, not for a long time. By the second full frost, Henley had begun humming when she worked. Soft things, tuneless and low, carried in her breath while she swept the porch or stirred the cornmeal mush in the kettle. She never sang outright, and she never did it when she knew Orick was close enough to listen. But he heard it just the same, and though he didn't let on, it settled in him like warmth after a cold ride. That morning she pulled on her boots and stood at the threshold, her breath blooming white in the air. I want to go up the ridge, she said. I haven't seen the valley from above. Orick nodded, slipping his coat over his shoulders. You'll need mittens. The wind's harsher up there. She already had them tucked beneath her arm, thick wool patched at the thumbs. I'm not delicate, Orick. I know you're not. They set out with their coats drawn tight, the mare walking quiet behind them, carrying a satchel of boiled beans, dried apples, and a second blanket rolled tight. Henley walked with a steady gait, but Orick noticed the way she kept her right hand tucked against her ribs. He said nothing, let her keep her pace. Midway up, they passed a stand of aspen turned gold and trembling. She ran her fingers along one of the trunks. Back home, we'd mark the trees we liked best. My father carved our names in one when I turned 8. I went back to find it after he died. Someone had felled it for firewood. She didn't wait for a reply, just kept walking. They reached the top before noon. The ridge opened wide, and the world fell away below them, valley stretching out in folds of brown and gold, the river catching light like a blade. Small cabins dotted the far slope, smoke rising from one in slow spirals. Henley sat on a flat stone, arms wrapped around her knees. I never thought I'd see anything like this again. He sat beside her, not touching. It's yours to look at. She turned her head. You always speak like things don't belong to you. I've found most things worth keeping don't stay if you try to hold them too tight. Henley looked down at her hands. You think I'm still trying to run? No, he said. I think you're learning how to stop. They ate in silence, trading bites from the satchel. A hawk circled above the far line of trees. The wind picked up and Henley pulled the blanket over her lap. My mother used to say a woman ought to leave a place better than she found it, she said. I don't know if I've done that anywhere. You've done that here, she turned to him. Why do you say that? I sleep deeper, and the quiet feels different with you in it. Henley's eyes didn't leave his. I don't know what to call what's happening between us. You don't have to name it yet. I'm not used to things I can't name. Orick shifted closer, just enough that their shoulders brushed. You'll get used to this. She didn't move away. After a moment, she laid her head against his shoulder. The weight of it was light but sure. When they walked back down, she let her hand brush his once. He didn't grab it, just let it stay there a moment before it pulled away. That night, she unpacked a small bundle of fabric she hadn't touched since she arrived. Inside was a folded piece of white muslin, embroidered with a red border. I made this for a table I never got to eat at, she said. I think it'll fit here. Orick cleared a space near the window. Then it should go there. She laid it out with care, smoothing the corners. Then she stepped back, studying it like it was a piece of herself she wasn't used to seeing in the open. Orick lit the lamp, and the muslin caught the light soft and steady. Henley turned to him. If I stayed, what would that mean to you? He didn't hesitate. It'd mean I'd have someone to build with and someone to come home to. She nodded once, then reached out and touched his hand, palm to palm. Her skin was calloused, warm. I'm not asking for promises. You don't need to, he said. You're already here, and she was, not hiding, not waiting. Just there, beside him, in a cabin with a roof they'd mended together, where the silence between them had begun to feel like a kind of music only they could hear. The ground had hardened by late October, and the light took on a thinner cast, pale against the foothills, as if the sun was holding itself back. Orick stood by the barn, hammering a new latch onto the grain bin when Henley stepped out with a letter in her hand. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, and her braid had come loose from the scarf wrapped around her head. This came by post rider, she said, holding it out. The boy asked if I was Mrs. Zeller. Orick wiped his hands on his trousers before taking the envelope. You tell him different. I didn't tell him anything, just tipped him a penny and shut the door. He studied the handwriting, rough and blunt. It's from a man I knew out of Rawlins. Helped me with cattle when I first bought the land. He opened it carefully, keeping his fingers clean from the oil. Henley stood quiet while he read, eyes fixed on the hills where the trees had thinned. He's heading north, Orick said. Wants to know if I'd take 2 more steers next spring. Says he's got more mouths to feed than he planned for. Henley stepped off the porch. You'll need more fencing. I was thinking the same, she nodded. I can help run the line if I stay. He looked down at the letter, then folded it neat and set it in his breast pocket. Do you want to be here come spring? Henley glanced at the bare trees. I've never lived through a winter without someone telling me where to go, what to wear, what to say. You won't find that here. I know, she said. That's what I'm deciding on. They didn't speak again until supper. The stew had gone thick on the stove, and Henley spooned it into bowls while Orick lit the lantern. When the light caught her face, he could see something quieter in her eyes, not fear, but a kind of waiting. You ever think about planting something come thaw? She asked. Thought about corn, maybe squash. Never had a reason to grow more than for myself. Henley pressed a spoon into the side of her bowl. I've always liked the idea of having something to tend that gives back season after season. He watched her for a moment, then said, If you want to plant, we'll plant. She nodded once and took a bite, the steam rising between them. The first snow came 3 days later, early and heavy. Orick woke to a pale silence, the kind that swallowed up sound. Henley was already dressed, standing near the stove with a kettle in her hands. Chickens are unhappy, she said. One of them tried to roost under the porch. I'll make a lean-to with straw against the coop wall. I can boil some oats for them, keep their bellies warm. They moved around each other easily now, like dancers in a slow rhythm. She handed him his coat without asking, and he set her gloves near the fire to dry after her chores. No words passed between them about it anymore. The care came without ceremony. That afternoon, she brought out a small box from her trunk. Inside was a folded square of brown paper tied with thread. I was saving this for when I felt safe again, she said. He waited while she unwrapped it. Inside was a worn volume of poetry. She turned to a page marked with a pressed fern. I used to read this to my mother when she couldn't sleep. Would you read it now? She hesitated, then sat beside him and opened the book. Her voice was soft but sure. The words lifted into the stillness, old and careful, carried by the firelight. When she finished, she looked over at him. I want to stay. He didn't speak right away. He only reached for her hand, his thumb brushing along the bone of her wrist. She didn't pull away. You're not just welcome here, he said. You're wanted. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling, their hands folded between them. They married before the ground thawed, with Reverend Harrow from the Ridge Valley riding up to do the honors. It was a plain ceremony, just the two of them beneath the cabin's eaves, with the chickens scratching at the dirt nearby and the wind sliding gentle across the snow. Henley wore a dress made from a bolt of faded blue calico she had found stored in a chest beneath the bed. Orick wore the same coat he'd had since Cheyenne, brushed clean and mended at the collar. Afterwards, they shared bread and apple preserves, and when the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch, her hand tucked into his coat pocket, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. That spring, they planted together squash and beans, sunflowers along the cabin's south wall. Henley built a small bench near the coop, and each morning she sat there with a book in her lap, reading aloud while the sun warmed the soil. Orick added another room to the cabin, with a window set high near the rafters, just as she had once imagined. She filled it with shelves and seed packets, and on the wall she hung the muslin cloth they'd once laid across the table. They never spoke again of Grady Hollow or of Howard Pryce. His name never passed her lips, and Orick never asked. Some things stayed buried so new things could grow. In time, they built more than a home. They built a life steady and rooted, with long, quiet mornings and soft laughter that rolled in like mist from the valley. Their love wasn't loud or hurried. It was slow and sure, the kind that knew how to endure. On warm evenings, Henley would lean against Orick's side as the sun sank behind the trees, her fingers curled into his shirt, his chin resting atop her head. And often, when the wind shifted just right, she would hum again, not to fill the silence, but because it had become a part of her. And he knew, without asking, that she had stopped running. And she knew, without saying, that she had finally come home.